I told my husband I loved him and ended the phone call. At that moment, the screen of my phone switched back to the last app I had open. Oh, Honeydew. This is a piece about starting and stopping. It's about the benefits of diving into the middle when the beginning just isn't clear. And it's about rearranging and recontextualizing once the truth of the project at hand is learned. I'm Tara McMullen, and this is What Works, the show that rethinks work, business, and leadership for the 21st century economy. Most of the work I do that's not this revolves around coaching, editing, and or thinking with people who have meaningful ideas they want to better express to the world. In this work, the question I hear most often is about making sense of a complex idea, the kind of idea that contains many smaller supporting ideas and stories and research. The sort of complex idea best expressed in a lengthy essay, a book, a podcast series, or a documentary. People ask, how do you go about making a plan for tackling that kind of idea? How do you get started writing or designing a complex idea? How do you keep track of all the bits and bobs that go into a massive project like that? From my perspective, 3 biases tend to trip us up when working on a project of this sort. I'll call them the linearity bias, the stick-with bias, and the waste-not bias. I'll explain how each gets in the way of big, messy projects. But first, I have to tell you about Honeydew. I am a daily and a little bit obsessive spelling bee player. Spelling bee is the New York Times game in which you find as many words as possible using the 7 letters provided for the day, including 1 letter that must be used in every word. Each puzzle has at least 1 pangram, which is a word that uses all 7 of the day's letters. A recent puzzle offered the letters H, A, L, E, T, B, I. And that combination has 3 pangrams: biathlete, habitable, and hittable. Now, on the day in question, for the second, maybe third puzzle in a row, I'd accomplished the highest level without finding the pangram. Now, I do not like it when I can't find the pangram. In fact, I try to find it before I input any other words. Now, this day, Saturday, I found 49 words. That's 90% of the total possible words before I found the pangram. I didn't find them all in one sitting, of course. I play for a bit in the morning, maybe a little bit when I eat lunch, and during various lulls as the day unfolds. Being the weekend, I had already picked up and put down the game several times, and still, no pangram. My typical spelling bee gameplay is looking for common pairings of letters and building was one of Tuesday's pangrams, building as many words as I can off of them before moving on to another pair. For instance, in the puzzle that I just talked about, I'd use ELT, EA, TH, and ABLE, among others. Now, this is a solid strategy, and it often leads to very fast results. But when I can't seem to find the pangram, I know that it probably doesn't use one of these familiar combinations. In those cases, the pangram is a weirdo. So there I was, staring at WODENHY and putting together WH, EN, NY, WN, and ND, and seeing no way for those 7 letters to form a word other than hoedowny, which I should note is not a word. It wasn't until I said I love you and ended the call with my husband that it clicked. The spelling bee puzzle flashed on the screen before I clicked my phone off, and in that instant, I saw it. Honeydew. Frankly, sometimes compound words are the toughest. Now, I'd like to avoid a trite transition explaining how honeydew is rather like working on a big, messy project, but I'm not sure that that's actually going to work out. Transition is a word, by the way, that could never be a spelling bee result despite it comprising only 7 unique letters. And that's because S is never included in the puzzle. Can you imagine? Just about every word you could make, you could repeat as a plural noun or a singular present tense verb. It's bad enough when ed and ing are included. When I start the spelling bee puzzle for the day, I have no idea what letters will greet me, other than not S. I have no way to plan how I'll complete it. I can't prep for a new puzzle, outside of playing the previous day's puzzle, and the one before that, and the one before that. So I just dive in. Am I diving in at the beginning? No clue. Solving the puzzle doesn't hinge on the order in which you find the words. Do I need to find the words as quickly as possible, or even in one sitting? No. The puzzle isn't timed as the crossword is, and it saves your progress for each time you come back to it. Should I avoid guessing? Well, frankly, I always feel a little bad about it, but there's no reason. There is no penalty for trying words that don't work. That makes this puzzle pretty remarkable, really. As I mentioned, the crossword is timed, a fact you can happily ignore if you'd like to, but it's also ordered. You don't have to complete it in order, but its linearity is right there in the structure. Numbered clues, first across, then down. The player isn't directly penalized for incorrect answers, but one incorrect answer makes the whole thing harder to solve. Anyhow, back to big, messy projects based on meaningful and complex ideas. Let's start with the linearity bias. To quote Jeanette Winterson's book, 12 Bites, "Where do we start? I would like to start in 2 places simultaneously. Unfortunately, I have to write in series, whereas the great strength of the brain is parallel processing." The tendency I've observed in writers, podcasters, and other media makers, including myself, over the years, is to avoid starting a project before we know what the beginning is. And to know the beginning, we kind of have to have a plan for the whole thing. And to have a plan for the whole thing, we need a complete accounting of the project's substance. This, as far as I can tell, is impossible. A meaningful idea, especially a complex one, is revealed in fits and starts. Certain aspects of it focus and fuse in a flash of insight, as Honeydew did for me. But other aspects seep and ooze out of the cracks in our approach. Even when we've been working with a meaningful idea for years, even when it feels seared into the meat of our minds, maybe even especially then, the idea has no beginning. It has no whole. It has substance, but no shape. What I'm calling our linearity bias is our hesitancy to do work out of order. It's our proclivity for an orderly, easily managed approach to the work at hand. Linearity bias makes it hard to see how a project can get started if we don't already know how it will end. You might have come across the phrase shitty first draft before. It's from Anne Lamott's lovely book on the craft of writing, Bird by Bird. I wholeheartedly believe in starting with a shitty first draft. But it's not the one from Lamott's book that I want to surface here. Before the chapter on shitty first drafts, Lamotte explains why she has a 1-inch picture frame on her desk. It's a reminder of short assignments. She writes, quote, "It reminds me that all I have to do is write down as much as I can see through a 1-inch picture frame. This is all I have to bite off for the time being. All I am going to do right now, for example, is write that one paragraph that sets the story in my hometown in the late 50s when the trains were still running. When I open up Spelling Bee, my goal isn't to solve the puzzle. It's simply finding a new word. After I find a new word, my goal is to find another new word. Eventually, I run out of words to find because I've solved the puzzle. Solving the puzzle is a byproduct of finding one word and then another and another and another. When I write a long, somewhat braided essay, I don't have a finished piece in mind. I write about one idea, and then another, and then another. I don't care what order I write them in. I just write whatever I can see through that 1-inch picture frame. That said, my metaphor of choice is actually an index card. I only write one index card at a time. When I'm done, it goes on a metaphorical pile with no order or structure, because I don't really know what I'm writing until I've filled up a dozen note cards and can survey my own thoughts. While we must, as Winterson notes, write in series, because language itself is linear, we do our ideas an injustice when we try to work them through from start to finish. Complex, meaningful ideas are not linear. They're networks, fractals, systems. Now, let's look at stick-with bias. I'm not sure I'd have ever spotted honeydew without taking a break. Well, several breaks. Even the word honey, with its relatively unusual EY ending, was tough for me to spot. I'm not proud of it. Now, I don't think breaks are magical, and I don't want to oversell the benefits of a change of scenery or perspective. I do have a tendency to expect the revelation of a new word when I open Spelling Bee in the middle of the day. But I don't usually get that kind of honeydew experience. No, I think the magic of taking a break or shifting one's perspective is actually a willingness to keep coming back to something frustrating or messy. What I'm calling our stick-with bias is our tendency to prefer sitting down to a project and sticking with it until either we succeed or we are convinced of our failure. Together with the linearity bias, the stick-with bias convinces us that the right way to complete a project is plugging away hour after hour or day after day from start to finish. What the stick-with bias does not impose on us is the inclination to come back to the same section over and over again. The stick-with bias makes us think forging ahead is the only way to make progress. If we can't forge ahead, likely because something we've already written or said or shot isn't right, then the project is doomed. In my book, I write about how people always want advice on sticking with a plan. My response is always, don't. Adapt, revisit, revise, change course, or abandon because of what you learn at each step of the plan. The stick-with bias makes it difficult to learn from our projects, to notice when they've become something altogether different from what we expected, to remain curious about what new questions pop up along the way. Because meaningful ideas are networks, fractals, or systems, they're also dynamic. No static treatment, no amount of sheer will or self-discipline can wrestle them into a solid, unchanging form. So why bother working like that? Pick it up, put it down, ditch half of it, rework it, but don't try and stick with it until you've got it in a chokehold. If you do, it won't be a meaningful idea anymore. Finally, let's look at the waste not bias. As I mentioned earlier, Spelling Bee doesn't penalize you for guessing nonsense words. And that's good, since some real words can really look like nonsense. It also means that you can play without worrying about making a mistake. You're free to guess or misspell with impunity. But when it comes to working on big projects involving meaningful ideas, our waste not bias often prevents us from experiencing that same freedom. The idea that we might spend an hour carefully crafting a scene or fleshing out an idea just to realize that it doesn't work, or it's not right, or it's just unnecessary is anathema to our efficiency-driven work ethic. If we're unwilling to waste our words, though, we'll likely find ourselves unwilling to begin. Insisting that the scene we set or the framework we describe must be the right one makes the first step and the next so much more difficult. What I found is that just letting myself write freely, unencumbered by a fear of waste, allows me to produce higher quality work in the end. Writing freely gives me something to edit, which is what inevitably makes something worth reading or watching or listening to. Now, editing isn't just a process of getting rid of what's unnecessary. It's a process of figuring out what the necessary bits are, something that I don't think can be done in the midst of creation. Editing requires us to step back and ask, what am I really trying to say or do here? And what I end up trying to say or do often differs from what I thought I was saying or doing. What I thought was a vital piece of the intellectual puzzle needs to be scrapped because I realized it detracted from the thesis I was arguing or the question I was trying to answer. Earlier, I said that I tend to write one index card at a time. Before I edit, really before I can even say that I have a first draft, shitty or otherwise, I have to go through my index cards, formulate a perhaps new thesis, make a perhaps new outline, and throw out anything that doesn't fit. It can feel like a waste of words and time, but it's not. It's a vital component of working with a meaningful idea. Without the waste, I couldn't communicate what I want to communicate. As we wrap up here, I want to say that the biases I've described here aren't innate. At least I don't think they are. The linearity bias, the stick-with bias, and the waste-not bias are all products of a culture and work ethic defined by the siren songs of productivity, efficiency, and convenience. In other words, labor under capitalism teaches us to lean into these biases rather than away from them. If we want to do bold, remarkable work, we have to practice avoiding these biases. We have to unlearn them. We have to gain skill at creating out of order, embracing a change or many of our plans, and freeing ourselves of the fear of waste. There aren't any shortcuts, of course, just a daily practice. In the words of Natalie Goldberg, quote, "All this requires work, exertion. We each carry an essential life force, but to contact it, to glow with our being free of opinion, philosophy, idea, and meet the clear life in others takes tremendous effort." The good news is that the results, like Honeydew, are sweet. Thanks for listening to What Works. As always, you can find a text version of this episode at whatworks.fyi, where you can also subscribe to get the What Works newsletter delivered straight to your inbox, free of charge. Plus, you can find out more about working with me to turn your own meaningful ideas into remarkable content. Today's episode was written, edited, and produced by me, Tara McMullen. What Works is a production of Yellow House Media, a boutique audio and video production studio that turns meaningful ideas into remarkable content. What Works is produced on the ancestral homeland of the Conestoga and Susquehannock people, and the Yellow House is located on the lands of the Salish and Kootenai peoples.